Hello everyone, welcome to the sketchbook tour. We're not just doing one sketchbook, we're actually doing two. So I really hope you enjoy this journey of basically my previous sketchwork, essentially. Alright, so starting off with sketchbook, official sketchbook number 1, we've got from August 2018 to January 2020. I would have been just finishing up school by this point, my high school years, and then this transitioned into, I think, just down the track after graduation, essentially. So let's get started. All right. Okay, so already we've got, oh, okay. I was trying to experiment with watercolor. I was beginning to at the time. I was quite obsessed with markers as well, but I didn't manage to really expand too heavily on that. Although I did keep trying to experiment with them, I think I realised they weren't really my medium. We've got some watercolor and ink there. I was very obsessed with creating people that are like animals, essentially, or have odder bits. Okay. Oh yeah, I was listening to some music and drawing illustrations. Once again, trying to do some pose practice. I used to leave a lot of spaces blank, which I'm glad I've kind of gotten away from that, because look at all this wasted paper. Oh no. Yes. I also enjoyed experimenting with inks. There was this artist, I was reading this Rumpelstiltskin idea comic of theirs. It was a different take on the story of Rumpelstiltskin, and I really liked the illustrative style that they had of their inks. So I was trying to experiment with different ink ideas, because I believe at the time I wanted to make a comic that never came to fruition because I ended up focusing on my studies at the time. But I did enjoy the idea of just black and white with textured work like hatching, like that. Yes, I got given a pack of Sharpies, I think, for, I can't remember what kind of occasion, but I was given a pack of Sharpies, and then I used this ink pen to try and do a lot of the line work through the hair here and the detailing. And I think I also used watercolor for the shading of the face here. I had these watercolor pencils that I used to use, and how I used them was much like a palette. I'd wet the tip of the pencil and then I'd put the ink on the brush and use it that way, instead of just drawing with the pencil and then wetting the pencil down. I was very unique in that aspect. More Sharpie work. And I did try and get into illustrating with pen, because I believed that it would have helped me improve my confidence with where my lines go at the time. And it did actually help. I can recommend working with pen. I was watching Daredevil at the time. I think this is Jamie Coe. I hope I'm saying that right. So trying to have my hand at realism. For some reason I really wanted to do just colour pencils illustrations. I thought that was just different and quirky, I think, at the time. More ink pen or just biro pen illustrations, more hatching work. And trying to emulate a lot of styles that I saw on Instagram from artists that inspired me at the time, and still do. More ink work. And watercolor self-portrait, large scale test. If this is anything to go by, the notes here. I think this was once again with those watercolor pencils. So you can see the pigment there is very blotchy. But I think I did really well just sculpting out the shapes in general. Although I could have used a little bit more work on the structure of the face. Although that is fairly aligned there. More ink work. Yes, the printer spirits. So these were meant to be based on the colour spirits of printer ink. So you had your magenta, you had your cyan, you had your black, and then you had your yellow. I think I really liked the movement that I was trying to practice here as well. I was quite proud, I think, of this pose in particular because I was happy with the foreshortened arm at the time. And I was quite into doing like floral patterning or movement patterning in a sense, like there. More style practices from artists that inspired me, again with Sibylle and Manette. I think I really liked this one at the time because I was happy with how the gradients worked. I think that was with watercolour as well. Pose practice, another watercolour test with ink detailing over the top. This is a swatch of all my watercolour pencils at the time. Here we go. This was inspired by a League of Legends clip I think I'd watched, and I was very enamoured with this character. I think I liked how she moved. I liked the colour combinations of the pink and green. Although I did try and hide a lot of my pose work with banners at the time. Here we go. So I've got some practice here and then a blank page of beautiful work. So, oh yeah. So we've got a skull and we've got the mandible, and then we've got the extension of the lumbar spine, which is funny because I also have this kind of extension. So we've got the skull, we've got the mandible, and we've got spine practice. These were very good actually to do at the time. I brought out an anatomy book from the library and decided to practice doing anatomy a traditional way, in a sense, by studying how the body worked. And I feel like that actually did really help in the long term. We've got more pencil pose practice and face practice. I think I was also trying to steer away from drawing the same face over and over again, so I did try and draw different faces just to have some variety in my artwork. So this is a watercolour pencil test, and this is coloured pencil, and then this is an illustration of one of my good friends. She's quite amazing actually. She's recently just graduated, and she's quite proud of herself actually, and she's really cool. I think I did show this to her and she was somewhat impressed by it at the time as well. I would have been 16 at the time of this pencil illustration. More pose practice. Oh no, facial practice for a character for a comic that I didn't really quite get around to because of my study, but I was still trying to get that hatching down and the pose work down. Trying to practice facial expressions too, and different ways to illustrate how the mouth moved in the illustrative style I was trying to go for. Here we go. Muscle practice. So this was, I think, the same anatomy book that I'd gotten out for the skulls here. So it's the same anatomy book, and then I'd gone to a different section. Yeah, here we go. And I'd started practicing how all the muscles moved, which actually did give me a bit of a better understanding of how everything worked. I think this was from a YouTube video, if I can remember, which I can't. And I think I've kind of moved away from drawing with this style in particular by doing the face and shape. I think I've transformed it into more of a different method and more marker practice. I think I'd watched The Grinch at the time. More hatching and pen practice. Benedict Cumbersnapple. I think this was a picture I'd referenced for when he was a younger actor at the time, and I would have been 17 when I did this illustration. Yes, character for the comic I was working on again. So we've got Zoe, and she was meant to be a witch that could turn into a bird. And I think the comic was actually called The Bird Witch, surprisingly enough. And then underneath Miss Zoe here, I had some hand practice. I knew I was quite terrible at hands at the time. And although I've gotten better at them now, I feel like I could still do much better. More watercolour practice and some memes that I think helped. I did actually really enjoy illustrating my memes. It really kind of pushed me to do a little bit more. It's an illustration of one of my younger cousins, and this was just after Christmas. I would have still been 17 here, and I think I got her quite down pat actually, and I was quite proud with how this illustration came out and how well structured the face was as well. As soon as all my family saw this one, they said, "Oh, that's your cousin, that's your family member," and they were quite happy with this illustration. Thought it was quite gorgeous. I think I was still using those watercolor pencils. And we have another instance of my watercolor pencils here with how I was using them. I was quite happy with the gradients in this mermaid piece, and then doing a bit more of a semi-realistic look to her. Molly, her name. She's a very cute little mermaid. Molly the mermaid. Alright, some more pose practice from Senshi stock at the time. I feel like this really helped with my hand practice. I was quite proud of that hand in particular and how I did the foreshortening of the arm here. And I really liked how I made the image pop with the blue around the edges here as well. I think I liked how the colour popped and made it kind of just stand out a little bit more. Some draw this in your styles at the time. I think I didn't finish that one. I did finish that and then posted it. And I was quite happy with this one because I'm not very confident with poses where they sit. As you can see, this one's a little bit awkward, but you've got to start somewhere. And the one time I'd opened my sketchbook and done an illustration in reverse. I think I was watching Steven Universe at the time, and I wanted to make my own little OC gem. So this was obsidian. And she was meant to be like a guard of sorts. Yeah, attack, support, combo. Have to be guarded as it was fragile. Oh yeah. And then if we flip you back over, another fan illustration of one of the gemstones in Steven Universe, and a portrait in a sense of myself. I was quite obsessed with trying to illustrate my own avatar online. So this was one of the avatars that I'd put on Instagram. And I was wearing my favourite shirt at the time, which said iconic on it, because I did feel iconic. Billie Eilish illustration attempt. A lot of blank space again. Another illustration of Zoe Thistle, Bird Witch. And this is where I started getting into more studying styles and how they all worked. So this was Loish on Instagram, and I wrote little notes here like strandy hair, solid with extra detail, noses often have definite shape, nostrils often have the bridge between nose, forehead and brow. Okay. Manga anime crossover with realism eyes, mixture between hard and soft shading. And then I also studied the Disney style, and I think I was mainly studying this style because I liked how they portrayed different ethnicities in a simplistic way, and I wanted to be able to emulate that with my own art. So I wanted to be able to portray different ethnicities because I noticed I was still having a lot of that same face syndrome, as you can see here and here. It's very, even though this face is a little bit wonky, it's still very similar traits: small nose, small eyes, averagey kind of lips. More hand practice and pose practice and some ink styles and another artist study, analysing how they did their line work in particular, and then some odd sketches here and there. I think this is where I started wanting to play around with extra limbs in my illustrations. I can see some lines here and here. Oh, and other little creatures like werewolves and whatever that was. Another marker practice with, I think there was a bit of white tinge here, so that might be some sort of watercolour over the top of it. And some more ink practice. I was starting to be able to create more diverse faces at this point, which I was quite happy with. And also trying to, I think this was logo design for my streaming at the time. I was playing a lot of Minecraft. More illustrations. I think this was for a draw this in your style. This was just a base sketch. And this is where I started understanding faces a bit better. I'd followed this tutorial on YouTube, and you can see I've got squares and some basic shapes here like prisms and whatnot. And the tutorial had basically said envision the face as a piece of paper that kind of curves around. And I think that actually really helped in the long run understanding how the face structure works. More illustrations, experimenting with watercolour with those pencils again. I think this one was meant to be some sort of magical girl with like water hair who had fish swim through her hair. Draw this in your style again. Okay. A little bit of a better sitting pose. I think I was quite proud of how I managed to get the legs done, essentially, although the arms were just a little bit awkward, especially with the pointedness of the shoulder. It's quite good actually to look back on all these illustrations because it shows where I've improved over time. So extra limbs again. I think this is meant to be like an arm underneath and wings, and starting to incorporate a bit of nature into my illustration. This was for Mermaid in 2019, and I tried to do these mermaids based off of gemstones. So we've got amethyst, aquamarine, apatite, agate, chalcedony, chrysola, carnelian, and diamond. And I don't think I got very far that mermaid, but I was quite proud of my diamond illustration. Even just without the digitization of it, I was quite happy with just the colours that I'd worked here. And I quite liked the top that she was wearing. Here we start to explore more plants in my illustrations, which I still love doing plants now. And I'm quite happy I took the time to start drawing plants and understanding how they move and structuralize themselves. So we've got some flowers. This was watercolor again still, and then pencil shading. All right, some more extra eyeballs I was starting to get obsessed with, and some more nature practice. And I think these were fan illustrations for Steven Universe again, and then more nature and oddity illustrations, which I was quite happy with, that I was doing just more oddities with eyeballs and extra limbs and extra everything. For some reason I was quite happy with this illustration despite it being so small. I really liked, I think just the pose of it, even though the head was a bit too big, I just liked the pose and the gaze and the colour coordination of it. I was quite happy with. Some more practice with extra eyes and some nature, watercolour, colour pencil illustration. This illustration was for, I'd listened to one of Tessa Violet's new albums and I wanted to paint the birds of paradise that she had. So I did a digital colouring in of the illustration, which I was quite proud of at the time, and I was quite happy with the pose and the composition of the illustration. More watercolour practice. I was quite happy with the shading in this illustration, and then happy with the intensity of the shadows in this illustration too, and the poses that I was practicing. And some more watercolour. I was quite proud of this one because I was happy with how I did the face and how it looked correct in my brain. It looked like the correct kind of foreshortening and pose structure of it. And some more watercolour and some ink experiments. So once again, experimenting with hatching. Another self-portrait in a sense with my iconic shirt, but just without the iconic written there. I think I wanted to make it less busy looking, and obviously have something in the background there. It was my identity at the time. We've got some watercolour illustrations with, I think these were wings, angel wings at the time. More watercolour practice, and this was something different that I hadn't really tried, where I melted the face essentially. And I think I've done different explorations of that kind of concept. I think this was for a Draw This In Your Style, although I can't remember if I posted it. So some more watercolour essentially. This was a sketch for the Draw This In Your Style again, for Mai's 2 Art, and I believe I digitised this illustration and did it digitally. Either that or I redid it on a different piece of paper. Some more watercolour practice and shading practice. I was quite happy with this one, even though the eyeball was a little bit off. I was quite happy with how I did all the values and the shading there. I was starting to also understand hands a little better, so I was quite proud of this hand, and just overall happier with my hands. So I think this was other Draw This In Your Styles, and then I had some of my own ideas and concepts here. Once again, trying to explore the extra bits and bobs, like extra eyeballs with this one. I think this was a Zelda fan illustration, a couple of these. And then exploring with colour pencil and ink again. This was a watercolour that I did. I think I was referencing a photo at the time. I was trying to get face structures down pat again. Another Draw This In Your Style illustration. Another Draw This In Your Style thumbnail illustration. And I think I was going for quite a few different concepts here, although the pencil is quite faded in some areas. Another self-portrait in a sense. And another self-portrait of that same photo, just on a bigger scale. And then that's, I think, the line work I used to digitise the Draw This In Your Style at the time. Another Draw This In Your Style. More pencil illustrations. Practicing more ink work as well. I think this was referencing some photos, and some more pose work here. And I think this was for a Draw This In Your Style that I did not end up finishing. Towards the end here, I noticed I've gotten more into the pose work, and obviously there's a little bit of nudity there, as you can see, but I was starting to really get into drawing those natural poses and more movement as well. Especially, I was quite proud of this pose in particular. Even though the hands were a little bit scruffy, I was quite happy with how I'd posed the legs and how it just kind of flowed naturally. And even this pose, I was actually quite happy with this hand. Even though it's not detailed, you can still see the proper structure of the hand and how it's meant to be pointing in a sense. Some more experimental little bits and bobs here. We've got, I think I was trying to do more colour pencil movement. Yep, movement illustrations, some poses. This was a concept for death and life. I think Death had a mask at the time to hide like the scary face he had. Alright, we start getting into some more colourful aspects of the sketchbook. So some more pose work for, I think this was for a Draw This In Your Style. More extra eyeballs, which I was obsessed with. Some more Steven Universe inspiration, and some more natural pose work where I started incorporating watercolours into it again. And watercolours and inks, I was liking the combination of at the time, just experimenting with a lot of the mediums I had at the time. Some more pose work, which I was quite happy with, except for this one. I think I did the head a little bit too big. I was quite happy with this pose though, and how dramatic it seemed. This was another story concept, and these were characters I'd written up essentially, and these were all their faces essentially. So I had the edgy emo one, the worried dad, the dumbass, the mother hen, and this one was a bit more of a childish character, I believe, at the time. Steven Universe inspiration, some more pose work, experimenting with hatching again with my inks, and some more ink work and face work, starting to really diversify my faces a little bit more, although still having some same features. Alright, I think this was another self-illustration of my avatar essentially at the time. This was a storyboard that I'd given up on for the story, these characters. So this storyboard was revolved around these characters essentially. More pose work that was very essential. I was quite happy with how I did the shading for this lady in particular, especially managing to leave spots of light on the cheek and the eye there, and you know, hinting at the body and how it all worked. Better poses all around, like sitting, I was doing a lot better with. I was quite happy with. Blank page, beautiful blank page. And then some more Draw This In Your Style illustrations. This was an idea for an anthropomorphized Pokemon at the time. I think this was the unicorn Pokemon that had recently released as part of the new generation. More banner and design works for my streams. More watercolor experiment and inspiration. This was the idea for the art gauntlet I had at the time, where I was going to do an art challenge basically 10 months out of the year, and then I had, I think, 2 break months. Obviously I don't think I got past April or May, so that ended very quickly. Here we have some fairy concepts, I believe, for Fairy February. Yep, some more fairies. This one was an asparagus fairy, and I quite liked her hair and how it just kind of towered elegantly. X-ray fairy. And then some more concept illustrations. This was just a concept for the layout for the opening page for my next sketchbook. And then that sketchbook's done. So that was my first sketchbook, essentially. Big A4 binded sketchbook that I used to lug everywhere. And I learned quite a bit from this sketchbook at the time. I learned what to do and not do, in a sense, for my next sketchbook, which we'll get to now.